Good afternoon, CLEA. Good afternoon, world. We have our next seminar. We have quite a few people online and a few people in the room, but sitting in a nice circle. Today we will have a seminar given by Evo Busseniers, a CLEA researcher, and Evo is going to make us change autonomously. Yeah, that's the drill. So, Evo, I'll put the camera on you, and you are welcome to start.
Right. Welcome everybody. So indeed, I will speak about how systems can change in a more autonomous way. So first, I will speak a bit why I'm interested in this kind of subject. Then I will play a little game. I'll present a model out of this game, and then afterwards we will try to apply these ideas. It's the challenge. So why I'm interested in autonomy, first, my student years, I was active in anarchist movements, interested in social autonomy, influenced by Stirner and Chef, who spoke about that. So often you have organizations who start to start to have a life on their own, where there are institutions which emerge and it's don't really serve the people inside anymore, but people are not really autonomous anymore. It's somehow they start to emerge, where autonomy was seen as creating the rules. You're instead of outside rules which say what you have to do, if they're you decide what are the rules by which you live. So there's this social autonomy kind of part, also for example economic equals defects, rich getting richer, all these kind of.
There's a request that you closer to the microphone.
So all these kind of things where there's a social structure emerging which decreases your autonomy. Then there's also the more personal story where I feel personally I'm sometimes mental health stuff, depression. I also see it all around me that today there's a huge problem of mental health and all this kind of stuff, which is also kind of a loop or behavior approach where you seem to be stuck in and not being able to go out. But that's kind of my rationale behind, where now I'm working on this original goal-directedness project, and here one of the ideas is goal-directedness is defined as equifinality, as means there's a certain goal and you want to this goal to remain, and there are perturbations from outside, but you want to always go into the same direction. And me and also other people, I think within this project, or sometimes I think part of it is interesting, but part of it is also the station, because change and being able to change yourself is also the big part of autonomy, which is kind of missed when you see it like this. What remains despite perturbations, which is kind of the cybernetic approach, where there's a certain goal which you want to a certain value, you want to keep stable, and you do certain actions in order for that to stay stable. So this kind of view, it also doesn't really look at how it can, or it's more difficult to say part of the project is also to see how can these goal-directedness emerge, whereas where it's so there's the classical cybernetic, the first order cybernetic kind of approach. The goal is it's more thinking of machines where the goal is put on the outside, a static goal, while living systems we see that the goal emerges from the system, and the system is adaptable. These goals can change. There's evolution where the system becomes different. So that's very this equifinality model kind of there's a friction between these two ideas. So like goals can be like there can be like a one-time goal where, for example, you want to like climb a mountain and you don't want to keep on climbing a mountain. Once you reach the top, you go back. It's not like I'm going to do this right. So that's why rather than focusing on like goal-directed things is seen as like what remains despite of perturbations or the where you can go from different directions. I rather want to focus like on autonomy, which is like that there's a self which is capable of creating the rules by which it behaves. So I will like explore a bit more about how we can like model these kind of things where there's like self creating the rules, but in general it can be equifinal, this kind of equifinality part where there's like a self which like can go into the same direction even though there's like a lot of perturbations from the environment or like the environment pushing it in all kind of random directions and the system can still maintain the same thing. That's one part of like autonomy, but I think there's also another part where like maybe the environment always pushes things in the same direction or like there's an external force and the system can go into another direction, which can be like the decided internally and can depend on all kinds of internal fluctuations in which directions it go. For example, like gravity is pulling us down, but as organisms, as like animals, we can move in all kind of directions, or like the wind is pushing normally pushing everything into the same direction, but like with sailing you can go against it or like in any direction you want.
Yeah, I just if I can interrupt for a sec. There was a problem with the microphone because it was disconnected from the cable and the mic that was being used was from here, so people couldn't hear you very well. But if in the recording it's too too bad, I will put the subtitles in the beginning, so it will be, yeah. Sorry for that.
So like in the project we use like chemical organization theory to like as a modeling framework, where well I think a lot of people may be already familiar with it, but I will like do a quick like explanation of it. So you start with reactions, which is basically certain species, so certain elements being transformed into other elements. So for example, A plus B going to C plus D, A plus B disappears and C plus D emerges. And then you look like to an organization, this is like a whole set of reactions where everything can be self-maintained, so everything can remain, is like produced as least as much as consumed, and there's like nothing new emerges because new things would like bring all kinds of other things. So this is like a small example of a organization. So you can see like I think I'm going to just also keep it on the blackboard. Let's say you have to start with the reaction. Let's say A plus B going to C plus D. So that's A plus B would disappear. So that's like not an organization. But let's say the C goes to A together with like an E that is also needed. But this E is like an input in the system. It's like always there. So it's coming in. And then this D goes to B and maybe also creates like an output. So here like everything can maintain itself and like there's like if nothing is if these are not reacting with other things, it's also like closed. That's like a basic form of an organization. And then we are looking like, can this organization like maintain itself So it's already maintaining like this, but also when there are like other things coming in, can it's like stay. So I mean, I think this is like a nice language to model things, and there's lots of interesting things, but there are also certain shortcomings in it. Namely, that it's like focusing on maintaining itself, staying the same, but like, what then if like we're looking at like a system that can change itself, so it's changing, then it's like not an organization anymore because it's changing. So what in that aspect? And then another aspect is that there's like little context actually in these systems. So one of the things is that people say is like it doesn't take space into account, but like also like in general there are like a lot of actually conditions which makes that it's these A and B going to C plus D and not A and C going to D or something. There are lots of conditions, temperature, or but also like so these things can be physical, chemical things, but it can also be like social systems kind of things. So actually there's like a lot of external conditions and they're like implicit in here, which makes that they seem like they cannot change. It can be like put into CT, namely by catalysts. So catalyst is like a species which has influence on the reaction, but like isn't influenced by the reaction. So it can be put inside, but often these are like just assumed implicitly. So that's already said. So now the idea is we will play a game, so there will be two parts of the game, and we like after each part I will a bit explain the model. And the idea is that we play the game here where we are, and then the people online, they can try to like make a model of what we are doing, actually try to see what they see. There's a certain, so I have a certain idea of a certain model. I want to illustrate it with it, but I think it can also be just interesting to hear like what model you come up with seeing what you will see happening. So let's start standing up. And yeah, Marta, you're also joining, eh?
Yeah.
I want like two people who were like so two people who would start, and they can be like, yeah, you could do like this. Okay. So someone else who joins. Like a bridge. Yeah. And then like yeah, you go through it and then you put yourself like this.
I remember it from preschool.
Yeah.
Like you got my one, and then every time we create this bridge, no, not
And then somebody else goes over through it.
fix the bridge. It's gonna be seen.
Yeah, you go through it. Yeah.
And now who?
And Francis or
Vincent.
also start going through.
Ah, okay, right, got it. I think the same. Another in the room. I can try.
Yeah, I think it's in. I thought it was interesting how you fix it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, well,
All right, I think you get the idea. It's like the first basic part. So we already discussed this one. We will make this, so we will build up on this part. We will first like discuss what's happening. Are there people online who like?
You see, I wasn't upgrading the camera, so I don't know this stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did people online see what was happening and did they make like maybe they saw like a really virtual thing and make like an interesting model of the feeling or something?
Dear people online, what did you see?
I saw people making these hands together and then the one after the other going under it and continuing when they came to the wall in some direction. but I do not know what more I have to say. It looked funny. That's. But what do you expect me to give as a comment now?
Like it's not necessary. Like if you could make like a mathematical model or something of what is so happening.
That's obviously what people do.
Well,
Yeah.
I saw it. I didn't see very much surprises once the setup of the game started. It was quite clear what happened, and although people could have gone to the left instead of to the right when they hit the wall, for continuing, that's the only, let's say, bifurcative moment. Okay, and also who who goes under the arms? Every couple it was not indicated from the start if the right or the left one should go first, so there was a kind of spontaneous choice going on, but that's all I saw on the level of, let's say, structure.
Wait. Are there other people who saw different things or want to like add something? No. Yeah, we have to like so this is kind of like a basic idea of, well, like what's like basic like model of autonomy, which is like still pretty. So what I wanted to express here, there's certain constraints. So there's like the arms being there, and these constraints make certain things possible and other things like less possible. So it's like alters the possibilities of what is possible. And then like one of the ways of defining autonomy is like when there's a closure of constraints where there's like the constraint comes from, so, or like what I said, like the constraint comes from within the system. So there's a constraint which creates certain behavior, and that behavior creates a constraint. So you have like the arms, which creates constraints of people walking through it, but then these people going through it creates these arms. And so there's this loop of creating constraints. So that's like a model of Matteo Mossi of autonomy, where like, for example, you have like in biological autonomy, you have like a blood vein, which is also like a constraint, which makes that the blood can go through it. And then this blood going, but then the blood going through it makes that the whole system can work, and that the whole system working creates the constraint of the blood. So basically the idea is that like the system creates a constraint which makes which influence the production of the constraint or the effects constraint.
But here when you say which isn't affected by the process itself, it wasn't the case in our constraint, yes? Because we were making this constraint, the process was making that constraint.
Yeah, it's a bit because it's like we kind of separated where there's the constraints creating a certain process, and then that process creating the constraints. So in the big picture, it is affected, but like in the small part, it isn't.
Well, it reminded me of a model that I saw for how microtubules looks assemble inside cells. And apparently some kind of a sigmoidic mechanism that certain molecules assemble themselves in the form of a microtubule. And then the end of the microtubule attracts other molecules to join on that end, but the other end kind of erodes. So the molecules are released on one end, and then to join the other end, with the result that the microtubule is constantly moving. And that is a bit what we were doing. We were making kind of a moving tunnel.
I think we can go to part two. Part two is we will like, so let's say you are this organism, this microtube kind of things, which somehow evolve. You like still evolve from actually constraints from me, but right now you're this thing. You feel yourself as a living thing, but there will be like new things which you will be fed with. So then you are this whole part, but you're also like pieces which are like complete things on your own, which will also react in all kind of different ways. So the idea is you will like in one way remain some kind of identity, but you can also change. And like so you will maybe create new constraints which will create this new loop. But like I was just like trying to figure it out yours, and it's like for me also an experiment how you will do it. But so first, it's just restart like the same game, and then you will be introduced with all kind of different stuff. We'll see what emerges out of it.
So same game,
Same game.
but the rules are gonna be a bit different. Or
So you should, it's the same game,
okay,
and you will just be introduced with, like you already had a wall.
okay, as a
So
constraint.
there was like introduced with constraints or just like inputs.
Okay,
There is stuff like there, but I don't know if that's anything to do with it. And like maybe yours just like will ignore it and stay the same, or maybe your system will completely collapse, but maybe you will merge into something else.
In how far do you expect us to negotiate? Because we
I-
negotiated with Marta, for example. She looked at me, I looked at her, who's going first. My assumption was first come, first go. She passed first, so I let her go first.
Yeah, you can like,
That was a negotiation.
yeah, there is,
So,
you're interacting species, but I think it's good to like move and do things and not like have half an hour of a discussion with each thing what you will do, just like do something and you can try to see what other people are doing and coordinate with them, but like just do.
but it seems that there is no consensus on what's going on in this. I mean, it's like one by one, each take a little bit of a decision, but there is no communication, right, in the system. It's just each unit, each cell or whatever is taking one small decision, which brings the system to move. But there is no coherent communication, right?
Maybe it will emerge because indeed the rules were pretty fixed. There was like what Karim was saying, there was still not a lot of surprise possible because you're just had to follow these rules. Now you're like more free. So maybe there will be something emerging.
You mean like this new game we're more free than the previous one?
Yeah.
Okay.
You should think about this basic organism which is evolved, but it can like change completely.
So can you give us the precise instruction we are?
So just start with how you were doing it like previously.
Start with it.
Yeah.
And this is all instruction you give.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I will introduce things and then you can see what you will do with these things.
Yeah.
So just start like you were doing before. So more room for the.
You want to go?
Oh.
I see very little because of the camera point of view.
Yeah. Maybe put it farther.
Yeah, you need to put it a little bit far, then we are able to see everything. Yeah, thank you. Better. Yeah, better. Thank you.
Turn the camera in the direction of the movement.
Can we like?
Sorry,
Okay,
turn the camera in the direction of. I only see someone's butt. That's not
Either
very
can.
informative.
Put the camera. I cannot do both simultaneously. So like you go ahead.
So to do the I thought this would be fun. Yeah, I thought so.
It's waking it up here. Organize.
Oh, it wouldn't kill anyone. Right. I think nice place fixed it. I can sit around. I know what people like online saw and what they like. What were their impressions?
Another heeft een mathematical model.
Please give us the numbers.
Like how did it feel watching these kind of things and like maybe
Any
things you noticed?
observations from the online audience?
No, this was really interesting to observe. I have some notes I have written. What I observed was there were new ideas what to do, and introduced by one of the group, and then it was imitated by another one. So we have a new idea, imitation, and then we have variation of the idea. Somebody else picked up the imitation and start to do variations on it, and then the next idea is coming up. This is one thing I've three things I observed. This is one thing. The other thing is that that I observed patterns of what to do. So patterns of behavior, let's say, that are stored in our memory and that we recall when we are in an improvisational setting like this was. And so these patterns of behavior become visible in such a setup. And the third thing is that also conditions play a role, like is there goodwill to let this game running, or is there goodwill? Is it constructive, or is it destructive? So there was no destructive mind now in the room. So the system could work, and of course you also have things going on like shyness or insecurity, what to do, and so these things also play a role. So these were my observations.
They're nice observations.
Just on the shyness point, I don't really agree. I think it's because we cannot communicate verbally. So it gives that impression that we don't know what to do, but it would be so much easier to say, okay, I like this game, let's continue. Or so we have to kind of show it with the body.
No, I never forbid you to speak, but like.
But then we would sit down and find a game that would make sense.
But it's interesting that the perception was that there was shyness, yes?
Yeah, exactly, because I didn't feel like kind of contrary, actually.
Yeah, I think everybody was trying things differently.
I didn't have the impression there was shyness. I mean, everybody was willing to improvise. Nobody seemed to be kind of unsure about what should I do now. I think we all spontaneously variation or.
I think the pattern thing was also indeed like, that's why I also tried to pick away all the balls, because like in a certain way, you keep on doing the ball game and it's like your normal like thing to do, but like to try to like make the thing different. Like,
I think I agree with the comment that we have patterns that we tend to reproduce, but I think there are stuff that is genuinely more fun too. So when you start doing it, you just want to do it more. Throwing a ball, for some reason, for human beings, it's so fun. I could do it for hours. So if you throw a ball to me, I want to throw it back.
This moment of the removal of the ball, it looked like a, God's eye. I touched to it, I removed it.
I have a question before I give my comments. What were the tools that were used throughout the game? Were they all there from the start, or were they added in the course of it?
I added them. Well, they were just lying on the table, but nobody. They kind of considered the table.
Yeah, but you brought them into the circle of the game during. Okay, yeah.
That was also
I nevertheless tend to agree a little bit with, I think it was Christian. I think the perception from the outside is probably different than from the inside, if you want, the spectator or the player, because I saw it was nice to watch, and you can see how the whole thing develops in a certain sense. And when new possibilities arise, new things are tried out, but I could also see the uncertainty at moments, conscious or unconscious. I'm not going to judge on that. And the getting into the new role, or the hesitation at some point of what to do, it was quite visible, I think, even when you did not feel it like that. It's not a judgment, it's just something that hits the eye. I also like the fact that there is something like a kind of, okay, it depends again, because that I cannot judge, I was not there, but on how regularly or how often not, or that new elements are brought in, but there seemed to be like a kind of stable time period for a certain way of playing, and then at some moment it changed, even when there were no other, as far as I could see, elements present, or when present elements that were present already before suddenly got taken into the game or thrown out again. So it's interesting to see that indeed some structure turns up at some point.
Yeah, just as for the hesitation part, I think again it's slightly different, because we're not communicating with the object. We know what to do with each object. It's more like we're trying to agree on what we're going to do with it. So we agree slowly to get what's the term now we say, to get approbation or consent from other in the group that it makes sense to do this. So we just start slowly with the idea and then build from it. But I think if I was by myself, or we would just throw the stuff in more confidence manner.
I think it was also like shyness is not the right thing. I think it was more like just uncertainty or like not knowing what to do next, like just having no.
But again, not knowing for the others, I think the whole thing was about the other because by myself I would like be very like I would throw the ball in a very clear way.
Yeah, you also want to create some coherence, so you want to get some time to have like one pattern in memory.
Exactly.
Yeah, one of the things that I think is interesting to think about too is like how we think about catalysts in these situations. Because it like catalysts like come from one person or even like a thing, like a wire or like those sticks. And then it's like it can be the catalyst, but like would you still view that as an agency? And I think that only happens once it's like once there's that agreement between everyone. That like so like where there's an agreement between what we should do or how we should organize. So even though like something can start as a catalyst, like a wire or like a certain action, or maybe it's an agency or like it's a shared emergent phenomenon once everyone agrees.
Yeah, I think these like just the catalyst on its own, it's not like not an agency. I think it's more if this can be reproduced, if like the catalyst can reproduce itself, or if it's like part of the whole, then it goes like.
Yeah, it's like I think trying to figure out like the gray areas, like it can be a catalyst, but should you view it as an agency if it's just like one act or it's from one person? I think it's like when it's agreed that it's like finally and it's like an emergent thing that's totally like an agency.
I think it's kind of well with like kind of the model. I mean, I think it's difficult to have a one-on-one essentially. So the model that I will like know a bit of model. So there was like new constraints emerging, which is like because of an unknown input and also because you were like more than just part of this whole, you were like doing different things. And this new constraint can like affect the organization and like create a change.
Yeah. I think I hope I observed it correctly. My impression was that everybody was trying when they are throwing a ball or to involve somebody like who was not immediately involved. So I think everybody wanted that everybody stays in the loop.
Yeah, because all
I mean, I did not see many exchanges like just two people exchanging. Apart from, well, there are moments that the ball doesn't go where you want it to go, but so in a way, it was a group of very benevolent players because you can't always expect that.
It's also like in the end, you were starting to sit there like not really playing anymore, and then we saw that they wanted to like introduce you to the.
I got what I
It's called nice and when unit is not doing.
I was told the lesson.
Yeah, this is I found this super interesting, what you said, that there was this intention that everybody wanted to look after each other, that everyone stays in the game, stays in the loop. And I asked myself if this intention might be an agency, which is already there, and that such an agency makes it possible that new constraints can come in.
I think that's a very good remark, because actually this may illustrate what we are talking about in the Templeton project on the origin of goal-directedness. We start with agents that each have their own goals. They interact with each other in such a way that they create a self-maintaining system. And in this case, the self-maintaining system was everybody's involved in the game. So people who go out of the game, they're kind of eroding the self-maintaining system. So they are brought back into the game. So the game as a whole is an emergent agent that wants to keep itself going, which means involve everybody available.
And it's almost like that depends on like the sensitivity or like the awareness that everyone's like in the same like space kind of. Or it's like, and I think that depends on yeah, pretty much like that simple awareness that everyone's try or like try to be a part of something like that.
But that probably also comes from external validation from other people, like, because we know that from an external point of view, it needs to be coherent. Therefore, we engage in this community type of thing, because I don't know, if there was no one to look at us, it would be easier to say, I don't want to play this, I step out, or I prefer this one, or maybe more individualistic. Because now it's the coherency, almost aesthetic part of the game that was, like how do you enjoy doing something? It could be different reasons. Could be because you like it genuinely, but it could also be that the image that you give of other people, or what you think the reward of this action is. And I think for me, part of the game was the reward, knowing that it makes sense as from an outside perspective. So I would be like, okay, we need to continue doing this, but not so much for my own sake.
Yeah, so it's this performative aspect.
Exactly. Yes.
In there, like if you like, if we consider all agencies, because we tend to have those conversations usually kind of like pretending that we don't know what we know. Yes. So the fact that it is a seminar, the fact that there is a topic, the fact that it's supposed to illustrate something, the fact that there is an audience looking, yes, that there is like, like there was a preamble of Evo, what he is like, like wanting to illustrate out of it. Those are all like agencies, yes, cognitive agencies.
Also, add to that our experiences, we have been told since we were little, play nicely.
Yeah.
So, because also if you play with kids from the neighborhood and you misbehave on a regular basis, the consequence would be that they wouldn't play with you anymore. And if you generally want to play with people, you would try to act in such a way that the next time you are not excluded. Here, that point I think is actually not pressing, because it's one-off. Let's say it's not a repetitive action, or I don't know, maybe it is.
Yeah.
Can someone, sorry, can I say something? Can someone clarify again the difference between constraint and agency?
To me, so a constraint is just like a certain context which makes certain things possible. An agency is if there's a system which can create its own constraints. So if it's like if the constraints brings a behavior which leads to the constraints.
So the agent is a constraint producing thing.
Yeah.
The agent produces its own constraints, so it's kind of autopoietic, but at the level of constraints, it produces its own constraints that keep it going.
Yeah, maybe I will first continue with this conversation. The slides I have.
Okay, but all the agents are nevertheless situated in a larger environment that adds to the constraint something which is not just produced by the system. That's what I get from the description that Marta gave before, and she said, yeah, but we all knew that the system of the game was like such, and there were spectators and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, so there are like a lot of external constraints, let's say. But then you can also create your internal constraints, which makes that you can be something something emerges which cannot be determined. Over the slides a bit. So to present this as a model, let's say there's what we had was a certain system which we started with, and all the external constraints we kind of assumed, or all the things, also just all the history we just kind of assumed were there, but were not explicit. And then we were introduced with certain new inputs, and then the system reacted to it, but it reacted to it in an autonomous way, in the sense that it was depending on its internal constraints what it did with it. So because it was standing like this, the ball was first going through it, and also all the different elements, what was already there determined what was done next. While like externally is more if like the system doesn't really have any like influence on what will happen. So like if I was taking out a ball, this ball was taken out and there was like the system could not influence this kind of thing. And so then what can happen is these constraints can like create changes, which can create new constraints, which like change the system, which can kind of become a whole and can like become like a loop. And so like what I already like I said in the beginning that there's like little context in COT, that's also where there these externally caused things. Actually, there are also like a lot of context, a lot of reasons why they're happening, and they're like just implicitly assumed, but they're like, which makes it looks like they cannot be changed, but actually often they like can be changed or like have an influence. Maybe like one example of like, so we have like this little game which is like one example of how this can happen. This change can happen like first like an example of like this difference between like externally caused constraints and like internally caused can be like if you have a plant and there's like an animal eating a part of it, it's purely like an external constraint because like this part is like taken and the animal has no influence on it. But then if like the plant would create fruits, then actually this plant produces this fruits so as animals would eat it, and because if animals eat it, there can be new plants emerging. So there's like actually a constraint coming from within the animal, creating like tasty fruits, which creates a behavior that's creates against these plants. Then like another example of like how to create changes like in eating the sugar, like let's say you have like sugar addiction where it's like you are in this loop, or like you want to eat sugar, creates like hormones which you want to eat more and more sugar, and you're like because you're used to eating sugar you want to have more of it, like it's like a general addiction kind of cycle. Then you could try to like force against it, but often that doesn't work. But like if you make sure you don't have sweets anymore in your house, it's like less tempting, you're like changing your constraints. And if you only do that, and it's hard to like maintain that, but because you're like eating less sweets, you will also like they will be more sweet and you will like be less attracted to it, so it will be easier to like maintain this change kind of thing. So yeah, this one was normally off it, but I think I will first speak about it. So I think so you have this kind of tendency of like systems to become like get into what I call like a vicious cycle where it's like not changing anymore. And like how to or what does it mean to me is like that there's like one part taking over, that there's like one loop of constraints which is like kind of becomes like almost like an external constraint because the other goals or the other things cannot be sustained more. It's like a loop which sustain everything else. It's kind of so it's like becoming like an external constraint because it like influences how things are going, but you cannot influence this anymore. Just like so that's why this was first. You have like so what you have is like this coordination of different constraints where like constraints produce constraints which then affects other constraints and they're all coordinating. So it's like actually difficult to say there's like one goal of the system. It's more like that the whole is like is coordinated in such a way that it's like this thing emerges, but there's like more coordination of different goals or different parts than like one part, and it's like often like when one part takes over, that this other part like cannot be coordinated anymore. And it's also like, because like there was also the seminar of Federico, maybe some people were there. You have like this general thing of emergence where like the whole is more than some of the parts. But he was saying like actually it's also like the opposites, that the parts are, or like that the parts are different than the whole, because the parts also have all kinds of identities and structures which are different than just this whole. Like you are part of this whole, but you are not just like being part of these wholes, you have like a whole agency and doing all kinds of different things. And so if you get into this cycle, it's often like, or if this whole takes over, it's often like all these different things are like neglected. So I said in the beginning that like one thing where like why this just this view of like equifinality is like not, and sometimes more interesting to think about autonomy is like when there's a one-time goal where you go to the mountaintop and you like immediately return, and there's like you just want to go one time to the mountaintop, or like there are lots of like one-time goal where once you reach your goal it's fine. So here you can see that there's like you create a constraint to go to the top. But like, and like going to the top affects you as an individual, so there's this loop. And so this goal becomes like correlated with the individual because it like emerges from it and affects. So,
Do you now use constraint and goal as synonyms?
kind of. Yeah, kind of. And it's not completely the same indeed. There's a difference, but like kind of use it as in a loose sense. So we also saw it like in a game where like there was like often things were constantly changing, but still there was like something emerging which had an effect, which then creates another effect. So there was like this internal. So in a way, you could just like differentiate autonomy with goal-directedness, where autonomy is where there's this internal thing emerging. Goal-directedness may be more like that there's something remaining and by perturbations or something. That's maybe a good like first thing that's to like summarize or like to have a general view. So there are certain constraints which makes certain things possible and certain things impossible, or like more probable or less probable. It changes the probabilities of what can happen. Can also be that new things that can happen which were like seen before. And so changing the constraints can bring change. And so autonomy is when you're able to like influence your own constraints instead of just only having external constraints. So the constraints bring a certain dynamic or structure, and then the dynamic can influence the rules or constraints.
Can I ask here,
Yeah.
at this part, is then autonomy synonymous to agent? Since the way Francis defined agent is an entity producing its own constraints that keeps it going.
In that way, yes. No, is that your definition? It depends on your definition of agency, but I think you can say it's pretty similar.
Mm-hmm.
There's definitely, I mean, something to be said about the relationship between constraints and enabling. I don't know like exactly how to make that connection, but I mean, the constraint must be in some way to enable to some degree. I don't know how like to articulate it so well, but I think that's
Yeah, I think but indeed constraints, they make certain things less possible, but they also make other things more possible. And like in a way, it's like just probability theory. If certain things become less possible, automatically other things become more possible. I think the image of the pipe, or like you can see the good stain or the thing, was just like a nice example of it. Like a pipe, in a way, you could see it as like it's constraining. Everything needs to stay inside this pipe. But then in a way, a pipe can really connect. And like if things are moving randomly, they will just stay locally where they are. While if you have this pipe, it can really go further away. So because you like kind of put your direction a certain way, you can really focus on that.
In that sense, having a goal could be described as having implemented such a constraint that whenever you have a choice, your constraint is that you will choose in the direction of like a certain outcome becoming more likely, and the not having this outcome less likely. Yeah, so that's the constraint on choosing, yeah, an action. Or like choosing, I'm always amazed how, those abstract words, we start speaking about them, and the imagery and kind of, like what we are speaking about is so physical. Yes, we're speaking like, like we're speaking about physical systems.
Yeah, I think the thing about choice in itself is like an interesting thing where when we're thinking about like humans really consciously choosing a certain thing. But I think often it's also like more like, and also within humans, it's like a natural flow almost, where you're an individual, it's all kind of a whole history, and because of that, there's a certain new input coming, there's a certain effect which is like more coming from within, because you're like this whole complex thing, than that it's just like coming from this effect.
Yeah. You can describe choosing as exactly having this, like likelihood structure somehow, somewhere.
I think often it's also like already present in like pretty basic organisms or something.
I would like to add something in this conversation about constraints. I think that an agency, I like the notion of shape or form or architecture. I think that many and often aspects of constraints are related to the architecture of the thing or the whatever is happening. A ball allows certain actions, but others not, right? Putting something on the floor like the rods and things like that, these things allow for possible actions and others not, because of their shape, their form. And I think it would make sense, and it would be useful to introduce this notion somehow in this theoretical framework. It's actually interesting that it's in a different way, of course, but relates to an ancient notion of form that actually helps understand that something is as it is, and not in the sense of an absolute object or something like that, but precisely in the sense that it can go into certain types of interactions and into others not. So it's just an interesting thing. I would like to hear what you think about introducing the concept of form or shape into your theory. I'm also thinking about Darcy Domson's research in this respect, of course.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think you can see it as a certain like constraint, as a certain shape can influence certain possibilities and other possibilities not. I'm thinking whether like the specificity of having a shape or a form, whether it needs some specificity or extra introduction, which is like not yet there, just seeing it as a constraint, or like making something.
Well, I think a shape or a form is intrinsically a constraint, in the sense that if something has a form, it means that it is in certain parts of space and not in others. But the problem I have with the concept of shape or form is that there's kind of the assumption that there is this physical space in which the shape or form needs to exist. Or when we're speaking about constraints, in the general sense, I'm thinking much more abstractly. And the easiest way for me to define a constraint is you have a state space, that means a space of potentiality, of possibilities. And there is a constraint if some of the possibilities are realizable and others are not. But of course, that depends on the state space from which you start, which needs to be a construction or conception. State spaces are not available there, so we first need to imagine all the theoretical possibilities, and we exclude some of the theoretical possibilities and allow some of the possibilities concretely, and then we say that is the constraint. The constraint is what allows these possibilities and excludes these others.
Yeah.
So in that sense, it is a shape, but a shape at a very abstract level. It doesn't require any kind of a three-dimensional physical shape. It's a shape in some abstract space of possibilities.
I think the problem with like the imageable state space is that like what is possible is already given. While often what you see is there are certain constraints where new things can emerge, and these new things are like not predictable. And so if you use a model of a state space, you cannot really, in a way, you're already assuming a lot of like what is possible, what is not possible. So that's like limiting the possibilities.
Yeah, that's kind of tough too, because like once you get like a state space or like this, like the state space, like the attractor state space that you, or you find the attractor states that might be a self-maintaining system. There's still like a sense in which self-organization can happen to some degree, like new state spaces might be found. Like there's still this like factor where like new information or new inputs maybe could maybe change.
Yeah, it's like what I said about this implicit context where there's like why are these dynamics there? What are the state spaces? They're like just assumed and they're given and seen as like unchangeable, while often they can be changed.
Well, this reminds me of a discussion we had at the conference to which I went in Marrakesh on complex systems. With Stuart Kaufman and some people that were working with him were speaking about his model of what he calls the adjacent possible. And that might explain technological innovation, why it accelerates, because what is the technology? Technology is a tool, that means it's a constraint. It makes certain things possible, but others not. But now, if different people invent different tools in different technologies and you bring them together, your state space suddenly explodes and you get more possible combinations. Out of these new possible combinations, new technologies arise, which now are again constraints, which can again be combined, and like that, your state space explodes. And that is why, according to Kaufman and his collaborators, there has been this absolute acceleration in technological progress, because each invention adds a number of possible combinations with other inventions, which explodes the space of inventions.
Yeah, I think in general, like combinations creates a synergies where you don't know what will come out and will explode. With technologies, but also like people.
And it is interesting how it's like it's not physical, like it's not a physical thing, but it like there's some sense in which it kind of is too, to some degree, at least like in a way that it might be modeled, like you might be able to like physically model like possibility. But it's like it's not like it kind of is in the sense that like it depends on some physical relationship, but it's not something that can be like seen or observed like spatially.
I think it's also just easier for us to think in terms of physical reality or something. Think about social context or something. Like,
yeah, I think I agree in principle with this differentiation between the state space and the three-dimensional space. Of course, it's an interesting observation. I would rather say that it describes rather than explains the phenomenon of this kind of
Sorry,
because
there's some hello. I think unstable connection or some problem with the mic. Can you try to read?
Okay. Can you hear me better now?
Yes.
Yeah. So you could not hear what I said. Is that what you said?
It was breaking. Yeah.
Okay. I will repeat it. No problem. I said that I agree with this introduction of the concept of state space in the context of discussion about constraints and forms and things like that. And of course, the state space is not the physical space, but that's also why I would not say that it explains rather than describes these phenomena of change or the growth or the exponential explosion or whatever. Because for the explanation, you have, of course, to return back to, let's say, the real setting of the things. And I think Evo was touching on that at the end of the discussion up to now by referring to, for instance, things like social context and et cetera, et cetera.
I will suggest that I maybe like continue. There's like so the idea is now here to like apply these ideas to like I would maybe suggest like one offline group, online group and one offline group. How many people are there?
So
Yes, to like choose a certain team and see like or like a certain problem or something, specific like vicious cycle kind of thing. See like what are the external constraints, what are all the contexts and opportunities, and see then which internal constraints you could be put, which could create an influence. But like to do that, I will first like speak a bit, give you a bit more ideas of how to think about it. So one approach which I was influenced by is like a constraint-led approach. It's like mainly an approach coming from like movement science, but I think it can be broadly applied to like kind of everywhere where you're like kind of stuck in a certain regime, you want to get out of it. So, or the original thing is like to try to learn a new movement. Learning a new movement, you can like, there are two kind of, there's like the traditional way where it's like with explicit instructions that we like, for example, playing baseball, instructions about you need to hold from that like this, no, a bit more like this, you have to hit like that. And then, so the constraint set approach is more like to put in a certain constraint so that certain behavior is like coming from it. For example, you build like a wall and they have to like go over the wall and automatically they will like do more than right movement to go higher up than what they were used to do. So it means that you like let the body self-organize and find like a good regime and like a new regime where it's like you can do this kind of thing well. Otherwise, these kind of explicit instructions, they like, or like kind of top-down put, and they didn't really work in different contexts where like, if like the ball is a bit higher, it doesn't, or like a bit bigger, it doesn't really work anymore. So it's like less adaptable. But like you can also apply it more broadly. For example, you have like the, if you want to like move more around, or can be like you're like, if you're left like in the constraint of being or in sofas, just having a living room with sofas and computers and so on, you will not be inclined to move. Well, if you like just install a pull-up bar, which you like always pass by, if you pass through the door, you will automatically often like play around with it and like have some things to play with lying around, you will automatically play. Sometimes it works better than to say like, okay, I will go to the fitness center every Monday, or like try to like force it down. And then there's also like, another thing is like also to see like, create like another perception of the environment where you can see more opportunities. So like doing parkour, and there you see it a lot, like you have like just the city and you see the city as just like stairs where you can walk up and down from. But then doing parkour, you see that way with the stairs, I can jump from there to there, I could climb it on, or you see all these kind of so the share, you could see it as like just an external constraint where we sit on, but then you can also see it as like something you can like play with and do all kind of different things with. So it's like and another spoke a bit about it already, where they're like, so there's these efficient or like there are these external constraints which can so it can feel like it's like, first it can feel like it's like just pushing you and like you don't have any influence on it. For example, gravity moves everything in the same direction, the wind always moves everything in the same direction. So you could see it as like an external catalyst. Let's see, there are like two either catalyst E1 or E2, and if there's like E1, there's a certain thing happening, namely E1. If E2 is there, there's another thing happening in E2. So you could see, for example, if the wind is blowing in that direction, everything goes there. If the wind is blowing in that direction, everything goes that direction. So there is like no internal influence, but then if you could have like an internal constraint, which like can like it's still using these, so this it doesn't like want to go outside of the environment, it's using it, but it's using it to its own advantage. So like could be like that to have like either constraint which moves like whenever you have E2, it moves it to A1, and then you will always end up in having A1. So and while or another constraint which like always leads to A2. So you can see it as, for example, having a boat which can like is put in to like a certain position, so that whatever the wind direction is, it's always going to the same direction. This kind of thing. So it's kind of to give you an idea of like what to think about, so you can think about like what internal constraints can you create to like create a different change. What are the external like from the environment? What are the possibilities you see to like change the ways? So the idea is to like choose a certain team. So I was like introducing in the beginning, like you have like this idea of like being in a vicious cycle of like feeling like things cannot change, or try to think of an example. And like think about, so we do it here, and like the online group can also do it. So I guess we like just mute ourselves for a while.
Yeah.
It's clear for the online people.
Dear online people, you are supposed to work together as a group. So I suppose maybe we can make a breakout room, just one, and everybody will go there.
Okay, to work to maybe after the break we can understand more about how to work together, right?
I mean breakout room. So
breakout room. Okay. Sorry.
So you will find yourself in this breakout room together, and but then you have to know what to do. So do you, or not so much?
Okay.
Is the instruction clear for everyone?
It is clear, but we will find ourselves in the breakout room. Someone will make it, right?
Yes, I will make the, okay, so I'm making it. But then there is no instruction in it anymore, just people, okay?
Okay.
Yeah, so let's try. And how much time do we have?
We'll see how it goes.
Something. No, but what we have to tell them when they will be summoned back. Yeah, so
we can like listen. We will see like we listen how they're doing.
No, because there will be the breakout room. So like the group here will be working together, and the online group will be working together. Let's say what, 10 minutes? 15?
Yeah, something
in
like
10 minutes you will get a notification that will be closing the breakout room. So okay, so
Wait,
so initially
say again explicitly what we are expected to do.
Isn't it easier to like just mute them, and then we can easily communicate with them? Like
okay, well then unshare the. I mean, you can.
Should we unshare? Because it's good that they can see this thing.
Because they have to see one.
Yeah. So you choose a certain team, so a certain problem, a certain vicious cycle. You try to find out what are the external constraints, the certain context opportunities which are there, and then you see which internal constraints you could introduce to like create a change. And it's also like this is kind of framework I put forward, but you can like think about like how to create a change into a certain problem.
So from the technical side, the idea is that we mute ourselves from here, and we also turn our volume off, and the online group is on their own. So best to put their cameras on and have a conversation, okay? Possible?
Yeah, it is possible just to go together and understand more.
Okay, so I'm muting us from here.
And the polity,
Okay.
We were thinking, online people were thinking about like coming together. So I don't know if you can like wrap up your conversation or.
Yeah, you interrupted Daniel. Yeah,
Gabriel, yeah.
Gabriel, pardon.
Gabriel.
It's the same, it's no problem.
Okay. Yeah, let's go back to the group then. I mean, in any case, this discussion can continue for a while. It's interesting
Right.
that we're not going to reach an easy conclusion quickly.
Yeah, so as you said, we like both groups kind of, if one person can like summarize or say what were the most interesting things which were discussed, or like how did it go? It's a hard exercise always, but like to have like a feel of what was happening in the other group.
Yeah, Karen, go ahead.
No, not me.
No, Peter, you were
No,
you
not
were
me.
the one who's leading the discussion.
No, not me. No. I'm not going to do
Okay.
it.
Usually it's like the one who proposes somebody who has to do it, no?
Then Karen.
No, the one who says somebody has to do it, they have to do it, Jihan.
Ah, Jihan, you're wrong.
I'm wrong. Okay, number one, we had a problem of understanding the instructions, right? Guys, correct me, please, if I'm saying something not accurate. So we had a problem that we didn't get clear guidance to help us to understand. So we were discussing on two levels. The first one, what is better to go or to bring like a very big issue or a small level. And yeah, because I have a bigger imagination, I was talking about conflict and the war. Those two examples I have brought to the group, and also another example about how the different reading of the economic problem in Egypt between how the people see it and how the government and especially our dictator how he sees it. And the interpretation, and we won't reach anything. We won't reach anything. And what else? What else we said?
I mentioned this example of the scapegoat.
Exactly, better. You talk about that.
Yeah, well, because Jihan mentioned civil war and this kind of problems, I was thinking, and I was struck suddenly by this resemblance between this kind of constraints that put something in a completely different direction. Anthropologically, you often see that if a group falls into parts that are fighting each other, like in a civil war, often there is a kind of scapegoat that both groups define. They burden this person or this thing or this little group or whatever with all what goes wrong. They go for it, they destroy it, and afterwards the peace settles in again. This is an anthropological, it's a kind of sacrificial act. And it changes the conditions of the conflict to the extent, I don't say that it's good, of course not, that's also interesting. This mechanism can work in many ways, good and bad ones. But it struck me that this is a relatively small action that brings about a big change. Not that the fundamental problems are therefore gone, but I mean, between brackets, peace is restored. And I offered this as an example to say that it's not so easy to define what kind of actions or situations or things could be constraints that are proper to use to induce such a change somehow. Voilà.
Nice, yeah. Indeed, it's like you don't really know what will come out of the constraints. We also, like, I think, talked about it, but we talked about other things too. Is there somebody who like wants to like try to say what they give an impression of what we talked about? Or we can try to do it a bit together. Like, I think first we had like a more like theoretical discussion about like what are constraints, and then you came up with like the example of advertising. So what did we? So that was like kind of our example. We chose like advertising. What are the effects of these? We said that they're like put as external, like they're external constraints which influence our behavior. We cannot really influence these constraints because like you're like nudged to make certain choices. And then you have like the feeling of having different choices, which gives you the feeling of being autonomous or like being able to choose, but actually you're like nudged from the outside of what's happening. That's what we were saying. Other things.
Yeah, that's interesting as well. This nudging, it can be useful, but it can be very vicious as well because it's a design pattern, right? It can easily get
Exactly.
into a kind of manipulation, taking away the autonomy rather than enhancing it.
Yeah.
It's an interesting topic. I didn't think about it on this bigger level up to now, but it's an interesting topic indeed.
It is.
Yeah, I guess like one of the things too is like it's like highlighted is like the role information plays in constraints, which is like a bit of like an abstract topic, I guess, like and kind of especially difficult to really like pin down, but like having certain information is going to, or sensing certain information is going to influence your decisions in some way. And like one of the examples that we use is like if there's like a really expensive bottle of wine, like a middle one, or like a I guess like low tier or like a cheap one, like this like inherent in that structure is already kind of a relationship that you are going to like, where like you're probably going to choose the middle one, if like, or most people will choose it, but I would probably choose the cheap, but other people would choose the most. But like inherent in that structure is kind of like through the information there's a structural possibility, I guess.
There is something else I was suddenly thinking about, and it relates somehow to this whole discussion, which actually brings the whole thing up from the little game to a higher level, which is interesting in any case. I was thinking of this presentation given by Slavoj Zizek several years ago, and he used an old idea of Trotsky, which is actually very nice. And he said in certain situations, like for instance, it was before the Corona crisis, but the financial crisis or things like that, you feel that you are confronting as a group of people, the population or whatever, a very powerful counter power. What can you, or a structure like, say, bureaucracies on the level of the Soviet Union or even the European Union, things like, what can you do to get yourself hurt in a way that you don't have to grab rifles and blow something up, right? And he came up with this interesting idea, which is apparently very old at this. You choose one topic, which is a very clear one and a very reasonable one and a very, in itself, realistic one, that touches something of the system, but that is still like an example could be demand that the negotiations within the European Union about the financial policies that are now held by the ministers of finance and some bureaucrats in a closed meeting, demand that they will be always open to the public, that there is a camera there and that you can follow them. That's all. Don't ask anything else. And he says this kind of demands insistently kept upon, which are not, the system cannot fulfill them, because of course many of these negotiations and the decisions taken there thrive by the grace of being secret and not being known to some of these trade agreements, the texts are even not public. I mean, actually this is completely great. Ask for this transparency in a systematic way and build your whole campaign on that, or your whole action on that, and that's a kind of demands that in itself is perfectly reasonable, not exaggerated, not extremist at all, but the system cannot fulfill it without changing itself or hurting itself or something like that. And somehow it strikes me that this kind of doing of policy, which sometimes happens really, sometimes is successful, sometimes is not, It's like with openbaarheid van bestuurdemands, this kind of stuff. But it is a nice example actually of the kind of play with constraints that you have been sketching. I just offer this as a subject for reflection. Voilà.
Yeah, I think it's indeed a good example of like, in a way, you're asking for change in the external constraints, which are like not possible to change, but like, I'm not sure yet how to see how this can create, like I see it in a way that you're like showing the impossible possibility of the system, why it should be like possible.
Yeah, voila, it's that.
But in a way,
in itself, it's not impossible at all. You simply install a small Zoom camera and everybody follows the meeting. There is nothing impossible about that. The impossibility is on another plane. And it is this contradiction. It reveals something about the system that says, no, we cannot do that. And then they come up with all kinds of reasons, right? So you reveal
I'm just
something
like thinking like, or do you have examples of like what will happen then to create change? Because I can also imagine that's what will happen if people have these demands which sound reasonable, but they notice that anyway isn't implemented, so they get demotivated, and it's like
it's okay, but I don't think we need to do the rest of the discussion about this, but just as a small, I mean, the point is that the kind of decisions that are taken now and that affect many people in a very bad way or not carried on a democratic level at all, could not be taken when the meeting was open, right? Because everybody would see the impossibility of this kind of reasoning, or there would be a scandal or something like that. It's on another level, right? But okay.
kind of times or the people who want to make a final remark. Or... We can go for a drink, yeah. We can go for a drink.
Everybody can.
Go for a drink. And also take
Enjoy your drink and your weekends. I have to go because I still have some things to do if I want to enjoy my weekend.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.